Good morning, everyone. This is the time scheduled for a technical conference in docket number 2305702. Dominion Energy Utah's Integrated Resource Plan for plan year June 1st, 2023 to May 31st, 2024. My name is Jacob Richardson, and I am the PSC's facilitator for this conference. And next, we'll do introductions, and we'll start with this side of the room over here.
I'm Dan McDonald. I'm an operations manager with Dominion Energy.
I'm Tyson Lauder, regulatory analyst with Dominion Energy.
I'm Matt Bartol, the general manager of operations.
I'm Will Schwarzenbach, manager of gas supply for Dominion Energy.
I'm Kelly Mendenhall, the director of regulation for Dominion Energy.
John Delaney with the Public Service Commission.
Ron Hogle, Public Service Commission.
Dave Clark, Public Service Commission.
John Harvey, Public Service Commission. Eric Martinson, Public Service Commission.
Ryan Daigle, division.
Tyler McIntosh, DPU.
Casey Coleman with the Division of Public Utilities.
Matt Pernicoli with the Division of Public Utilities.
Patrick Griecu, Attorney General's Office representing the DPU.
Gary Smith with the division.
Sophie Hayes with Western Resource Advocates.
Carl Boothman with Western Resource Advocates.
Doug Wheelwright with the division.
Austin Summers with Dominion Energy.
Thad LeVar with the DSC.
Alex Ware with the Office of Consumer Services.
Michelle Beck, OCS.
Jacob Zachary, OCS.
All right, well, thank you for everyone for being here, and we'll now turn the time over to Dominion.
And are we streaming at this point?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time because you are going to get an extra heavy dose of me today. I have 3 different sections to talk about here, some things, and they kind of flow into each other. So I'm sorry we couldn't spread it out and have just little bits of me here and there, so you get it all today. We're going to start off. Here's just kind of our IRP schedule. We are on the April 25th one here, so we're going to talk about the heating season review, our gas supply hedging, where we're at with that this year, and what we want to do going forward. We'll talk about our transportation and storage planning, and then Dan, you get relief from me, and Dan is going to talk a little bit about our LNG. All right, jumping into this heating season, we were talking about a little bit before the meeting started. It's been quite a winter, and I say that from basically every aspect at this point. So from the weather we've had with all the snow, from the temperatures we've had, and from pricing. So we're going to kind of dig right into that. So if I had to summarize this heating season, I'd say high demand, increased volatility, and high costs. It was quite a winter. And if you follow the news and you have friends in other places or anything, it may have seemed like we were the only ones having a winter this year, and we really were. So here's 2 maps that kind of show that. The first one is a map of the world. So the entire world from December through February. This is the basically the variance from normal or average temperatures. A whole lot of red. The whole world was warm with the exception of basically us over here in the western United States. Antarctica, and I assume this is Siberia, so that's kind of the company we have at this point, is those couple of cold places. If you look at just the U.S., it's a tale of 2 stories, right? We've got, and this is the 90-day mean ending April 4th of 23. So this is kind of covering the heating season. You can see we were cold in the west and hot in the east. So we have been kind of on a cold, wintry island here in the western United States. Let's look specifically here. This is our heating degree days. So anything above the blue line, which is our normal heating degree days, this goes from October through the end of March. Anything above that blue line is actually colder than normal. Anything below it is warmer than normal. So just kind of walking through, we started off October pretty warm, and then towards the end of October it got cold. Basically stayed colder than normal, with a couple of exceptions, but basically stayed colder than normal all the way through the end of December. You may have forgotten it, but we did have a couple days there in late December, early January where it got a little bit warmer. But then we got cold again and basically stayed cold all the way through the end of March and to start with in April. So in average, we were 4.3% colder than normal. but our colder than normal days, we had 113 compared to 69 warmer than normal days. So there was quite a bit of cold weather. And as you know, our demand is very weather sensitive. So a lot of cold weather meant a lot of demand in that period. Our demand follows similar. So anything above I've got my lines reversed here, I guess. But anything above the green line, which is what we expected in the IRP, so that blue line is actual demand. And you can see quite a bit of demand, followed the weather. But if you look here, here's a day or a couple days we're going to talk about pretty significantly, which is January 30th to February 1st. Those were actually our highest send-out days ever. So on top of a really cold winter, John?
How many years do you use to calculate normal?
30.
30, yeah.
Thanks.
So we were 10.6% higher than normal here in this period, so the winter period. So pretty significantly cold. If we look here, I started doing this last year and it was interesting, but this year I think it's even more. So this is our top 20 total system demand days ever. And I've got them color coded. All the colored ones are from this heating season. But I've put them together into colored groups, right? So these orangish shaded ones are all the same event, right? So you had January 30th through February 1st there, all one event. So that first event had our two top total send-out days ever. So the 30th and 31st of January. And then the next day warmed up a little bit, so it was only the 13th highest send-out day. Michelle?
How does that compare to what the design day is? How
We're
close
gonna,
did we
that's
get?
it's
You'll
coming
get
up.
to that?
Yep,
Oh,
coming up here. But you can see we had, it wasn't just one cold event. This was February 15th. That was a top 9 day. Down here in blue, we had a totally isolated event, January 22nd, another cold day. That was the 16th highest. Even in December, we had one of the 17th highest. And then again, late February, we had another one. So multiple cold events, prolonged cold throughout the winter. It was the folks that work for me that are buying gas and doing this every day, they're very ready for spring. So here's your diagram, Michelle. This is from last year's IRP. We put this in every IRP year. So these show the actual. So we've got the transportation is built on top of our firm sales. So this is sales and transport. These are our actual highest days. And then over here is the design day, right, going forward. So this would have been 22, 23. So right here was the design day. So our highest sales send-out day is here. You can compare that to the past few winters in green, and then where our design day is here in blue. And then our total send-out, so with transport built on top of it, we were right here at 1376, which I believe if I go back a slide, our previous high day was 1280. So it was almost 100,000 decatherms higher than our previous high send-out day. Question?
Would you just explain to me what a design day is?
Sure. Design day is we look at a -5 degree day and what we expect our demand to be on that. And that's what we design our whole system. That's what we plan everything around, is to make sure that we can meet that particular day. That's a -5 degree day.
Okay.
But this mean was only a 15. So you can see we're not quite at the design mean, but it was a 15 mean.
I need to correct something I said. 20 years, not 30.
Thanks.
All right. I was thinking that, but I didn't want to correct you.
Hey, one follow-up on the design day question. I know you've said the -5 before. Is that the average temperature or
Yes.
just the
That's the mean temperature for the day.
Okay, so the low would be significantly below
Yes.
that typically.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And I think an important note on this, though, is we actually, as difficult it was, we were buying a lot of gas, and as you'll see, it was expensive. The good news was we actually made it through pretty well. We didn't have to interrupt any customers. Because the system, our upstream systems were in good shape beforehand, we didn't have to issue, we had restrictions on, they were not allowed to draft us, stuff like that, but we did not have to interrupt any customers or anything. We actually made it through pretty well. Alex?
Do you have any information on the amount of like well freeze-offs or anything you had this winter?
I don't know how many well freeze-offs, but I think in the next slide, we're gonna show kind of how the demand dropped over that period, and you can assume a lot of that is kind of well freeze-offs, production facilities going down, stuff like that. So I think that's our next slide here is kind of a deeper dive into that January 30th, February 1st event. So I don't know exactly how many wells. But what you can see here is the interesting part, and we'll see it in another graph, is January 30th was a Monday. That's an important thing in our world, because when we buy gas for the weekends on Friday. So we buy gas, the same packages, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. We plan that on Friday. So when we look at the weather forecast, we estimate our demand, we're doing it Friday morning for what we expect on Monday. So the coldest day was the Monday, which creates some interesting things for Friday and Saturday, but what it also means is we kind of, like the accuracy of forecasts, as you know, get better as you get closer, right? So we always know better the day before than we do 3 days before. So we kind of had our best guess, and we were there of where we thought our demand was going to be. And this is kind of how our demand stacked out. So there we are at the 1.376 up here. So if you look down the bottom, we were getting about 153,000 decatherms of Wexpro production, and that did show up on the 30th. Again, 30th was kind of the first of the warm day or the cold days. Usually it's kind of your highest day is usually like the second day, or you kind of gradually get there. We kind of dropped pretty quickly. So Wexpro was about 153,000. Our baseload supply purchases about 253,000. Peaking in spot almost 400,000. Then we pulled quite a bit out of storage. So we pulled 227,000 decatherms out of storage on that day, and then the rest was. Sorry, I got two greens. Oh, the rest on top of that is the transportation customers, what they brought to the system. So as we moved from the 30th to 31st, it was the second day of the cold, which usually the higher demand, but this one wasn't quite as high a demand. But you could tell some of our supply dropped off. So our Wexpro, we did lose some Wexpro went down. So we might have been a processing plant, could have been well freeze-offs, but we did lose about a little under 20,000 decatherms from there. You notice our baseload went down. So some of those contracts, even those have reductions as well. And then the good news though is we could on this day buy for this day. So we now know that it's going to be cold. We're expecting it. We increased our spot, and we were able to go out on the spot market and go and do that. So we bought more spot, meant we could actually have a little bit more buffer in our storage. This had storage going really strong, right? And so we were able to back off storage a little bit on this day, and transport customers just kind of did what they did. They brought their supply, which was good. You don't see any. You saw a little bit of a drop off, about 15, but we didn't see a big drop off, which is why we didn't have to put a hold burn to scheduled quantity or anything like that. The gas was actually out there, which was the pleasant surprise from this, is we were able to buy it. Commissioner?
Yeah, on the 30th, was there anything constraining how much Wexpro production you had available that day in relation to the baseload supply purchases?
Well, about
the ratio surprises me a little bit.
About 153 is what we're getting from Wexpro right now. So there's not much more they can turn on or anything like that. That's about what we're getting, and we did have a few reductions. Some of the fields did go down and stuff like that. So that was really the constraint, is just they could develop more field. They are increasing their drilling program. I think we talked about that last time. They're looking for more production. But right now, 153 is about where we've been topping out with what we're getting from them.
But in the summer, that 153 makes up the lion's share of your.
Yeah,
gas,
it's
right?
153 is about everything. It covers all of our demand, which is probably in the summer 80 to 90,000 decatherms, and then it still has us being able to put in 50 to 60,000 decatherms into storage at that 153 level.
Okay.
So year-round, they're providing about 50%.
Well, so Kelly, yeah, you thanks. Because the percentage that we have that's the sort of the upper limit for Wexpro is that an annual average?
Yeah.
Is that,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And that's at 65%, and they're not at the 65%.
Right, okay.
They're working on bringing it up for
Okay.
There's another question over here.
That was my question.
Okay. All right, so you can see some of the things dropped off. Oh, Chairman?
First of month pricing is a portion of the green, right?
Yes. Yep, and we're gonna dig into that as well.
Right.
Okay.
Can I go back to the Wexpro? By agreement, 65% is not the
55 is.
55% by agreement is our peak, is our max.
And there's mechanisms where we could go up to the 65, I believe, right?
For
Under certain circumstances. yes.
Certain circumstances, they could. Yes, but we're not at the 55 either.
So I haven't been in gas very long, but if you have a resource that you have locked in at the price, why is it that when your price is going to be the highest and you need the most demand, you're getting the least amount from them as far as Wexpro?
Well, it's just physical. The fields got frozen in. I mean, it's
They consistently are giving you 153,000 every day for the entire year.
yeah.
So
We didn't.
they can't turn up the spigot in the winter and turn it down. It's just, it's a well, it's providing the same amount of gas throughout the year. So that's why we have storage. We put a lot of that gas in storage. And the storage, what's the purple?
Storage is purple.
So that is, a lot of that is Wexpro gas coming out in the winter.
Yes.
And we learned, maybe a decade ago, that if there's more than 65% average across the whole year, then they have to shut it in. Because there's too much, there's no place to put it
In the summer.
And so 65% really has to be, we learned that, due respect to my colleagues live on this side, we learned that the hard way when the prices were the max above market. And we were paying all this money for Wexpro and then paying for it and shutting it in. So we learned that it was a hard lesson, but that's where that comes from.
So yeah, unfortunately, we've had years of really low pricing, right? $1 to $2 range even. So Wexpro is kind of their production percentage has dropped down. They haven't been drilling as much, and now that prices have kind of bumped back up, we're going to be increasing the drilling there, trying to catch back up. But yeah, we didn't choose for this to go down from 153 to 126. It was more just operational issues, that kind of stuff, and that's what happens on those really cold days. Is you do wind up with some operational issues. It didn't stay down for long. It came back up the next day. You could see it kind of bump back up. They got a little boost to it, and it was at 153, 156. So everything kind of came back in line that third day. So we didn't see prolonged outages. We didn't see anything major. We actually managed through this pretty well, considering how high of demand it was compared to some of the previous years. So here's another look at Wexpro since we're talking about it. This is our cost of service production for the IRP year. So the green line here is what we predicted the production to do in the IRP based on their forecasts and their projections. The blue line is what we actually did. So we followed it pretty closely. We didn't get as much of a bump here in November as we thought we would. There were some delays on some of the wells. There's supply chain issues, that kind of thing, delayed when some of those wells could have come on. But all in all, we're staying pretty close to that orange line in terms of the cumulative cost of service. So we're really close to what we expected to get from Wexpro, but we're a little bit below. So let's talk about pricing now. So the weather was just part of the story for the winter, where we had high demand. The other part of the story is pricing. And what you're looking at here is daily pricing at three different pricing indices or hubs. We've got Kernopal in blue, which is where we buy the majority of our gas. White River Hub, which is where a smaller portion of our gas is priced. And then I put Henry Hub on here just to kind of give you the baseline of kind of what's going on in the rest of the country. So you could see everyone over the summer had quote unquote high prices, right? If you don't think about the winter, compared to what we've seen historically over the past, I don't know, 5, 6 years, maybe even 10 years, those are high prices. We're up near $10 all through the summer, and that was across the U.S. So that was not just isolated here to the west. That was all U.S. It was strong demand for LNG that was being exported to Europe. A lot of factors that played in that, but high pricing. Then we get to the heating season, and where the rest of the country, as I pointed out, was fairly warm, so demand did not ramp up. Demand did not really outpace production, except here in the West. We look at what happened with Kern Opal and White River Hub. We were, again, back on our island away from the rest of the country. We had these really high prices, I mean, up over $50 on daily pricing. Commissioner?
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off
Oh, no
mid-sentence at all. I'll raise my hand when I...
Absolutely, I love it.
Thanks. So how much of the gas through those two hubs goes to California, and in particular to power plants in California?
I don't know the percentage of exactly how much goes to the power plants. I would say Kern Opal is connected that to Kern River's pipeline. It's kind of the start of Kern River's pipeline. So that is definitely directly tied. The majority of that gas is going down Kern River to Southern California. It's also tied in Opal it's a major hub. So you've got some gas that's going across Ruby Pipeline to Northern California. You've got Northwest Pipeline, which some of it goes to the Pacific Northwest, but it is probably the primary source of gas, especially this winter, because their line that was cut off to the Permian, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Right. So even more of it pushed to Kern Opal. White River Hub, there's more constraints between there and California. It can connect over Mountain West Pipeline's Mainline 104 connects it over to Kern's pipeline, which then goes down to California. But there are some constraints in there. That's why you usually see there's a basis differential between the two, because it's not as closely connected to California. But with that Mainline 104, it does send it there, but it's constrained, so it reaches a point. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we see high summer pricing, and then the rest of the country kind of dropped off. They've experienced low pricing, which was really hard for me all winter when we're dealing with this. I'm reading all of the articles and stuff like that are out in the media about how gas demand is down and gas pricing is down, and I'm like, well, that obviously you're not looking at the West, because it was a different story here. This is the next part of the story. So along with those daily pricing indexes, so that's kind of your spot pricing, your everyday, what you can go on the market and buy. There's also monthly pricing indexes, and those are set for the entire month. So whatever that comes in at, and they're based on purchases. People will buy baseload purchases for the month at a fixed price, and there's a week called bid week, and that kind of sets your price. So whatever people are willing to pay, and bid week happens kind of the last week. So for January, it happened the last week in December. So whatever everybody was locking in gas pricing for the full month of January, that happened the last week of December. As we look at this, and then they were set for all of January, for example. If we look at this, and this is going back to 2011. It's kind of small, so I don't know if you can see that, but I went all the way back to 2011 and said, what did these first of month pricing look like? And with the exception of a few bumps here at the SoCal City Gate, which is directly into California, it's relatively flat. Not a whole lot of spikes. We've seen some here this year, but not a whole lot of spikes going on in there. And historically, this has been a great hedge. This is what just about everybody has used to hedge the cost of a lot of the gas. The problem is now we came in and January, and that's both SoCal City Gate and Northwest Rockies. Those are our monthly pricing indexes we have deals at. Those came in over $50, or Northwest Rockies I think was in at 49. I don't think you can see it there, but the graph is, the scale is too far. But $49 and just over $50. And that was, I mean, you could see it's an anomaly. It's not something we've seen before. at least not relatively recently, and it's not something that anybody expected. So that's kind of what really shocked the market. And a lot of stuff was going on right then that caused that. Is we had those high pricing all through December, right? So we're seeing $50 pricing already in December. Now it's bid week, which is kind of the last week in December. And if you remember, there was a big winter storm that kind of moved across the country at that point. I think they called it Winter Storm Elliott. And it hit the East Coast really hard. So just for a couple days, the East Coast did have some cold temperatures, like some record cold temperatures on the East Coast. That drove gas pricing up. That was going on the East Coast the same time our bid week was going on here. And while that was while we warmed up for a few days in that period, our forecasts for all of January and everything were still showing really cold. So the market is seeing these high pricing impacts on the East Coast. They're seeing our historical high prices in December, and it kind of scared the market, which, people fixed prices at $50. And that's kind of what impacted us and how we wound up with those first of month pricing at $50. So let's look at our winter pricing kind of as a whole now. We've got a couple of things built in here. I've got this red line, or let's start again. I've kept Henry Hub in there to show you what's going on kind of the rest of the country. That's that low baseline down there, what everybody else was dealing with. Then you've got this red line here, which we'll talk about more in the hedging discussion, but that's our fixed price contracts that we bought 77,000 decatherms for the winter for December through February of fixed price contract. So we'll call it $8, right around the $8. So you can see where that $8 gas did comparing to everything else in the country. Then you've got, again, those blue and green. That's Kernopal and White River Hub. That's your daily pricing. So there's what you see in December, those high prices in December. And the purple line and the black line are your monthly pricing indexes. So there's your Northwest Rockies and your SoCal monthly pricing index. So again, they did bump up a little bit. They were $12 and I think $13 or $14 in December. But then they were much lower. So they were a great hedge in December, right, compared to your daily pricing. Well, then you had all this, scared the market, and now those first of month contracts came in up here to try and match the daily pricing from December. Then the daily pricing actually dropped down. So your daily pricing kind of came back in line, but your fixed month pricing was already out there for the entire month, and that's what we were dealing with. Luckily, it did come back down in February, but we did have concerns all through January what February was going to look like. John, did I see your hand up?
Yeah. So you talked about the monthly price, the first of day price there. Do your contracts lock in a quantity at that amount, or
Yes.
is there some variability? Or
Nope, they were baseload contracts, meaning we've agreed to take that amount of gas, and they've agreed to provide that amount of gas for the entire period at that price. So yeah, if they would have been variable, we would have definitely brought the volume down. But unfortunately, that's not the nature of it, right? That's the baseload contract is there to protect us and make sure that we have that gas available every day, and you lock in the price at the first of the month, and that's kind of what was hard. But luckily, things now down in April have kind of come back in line, and we settled down a bit from the pricing standpoint. And we're going to talk more about kind of the hedging and stuff like that in the next section. A little more of me there. So what was driving these prices? Again, I mentioned the summer pricing. It was throughout the U.S. due to the global demand, a lot of LNG being sent to Europe. They were preparing for winter. Subsequently, they didn't have a winter either. It was much warmer there in Europe. And then a big part of the story is the reduced storage inventories in California. They had high summer demand for natural gas, right? They had a warm summer, but it was a warm, dry summer, so they had some reduced hydro generation as well. I think a lot of those drought concerns have now been alleviated with the wet winter they've had, but they had, back then, they had reduced hydropower, and also a lot of demand because of the warm. And then another key thing that has happened in the market, especially in California, is PG&E, that's what this graph shows here, and their storage. So they took 51 BCF of their working gas in storage and moved it to cushion gas, meaning it's not available for them to use on the market. And they did that, and apparently at the same time, to keep themselves whole, they reduced their working gas in their storage facilities, but they went out and bought a bunch of storage capacity in other storage facilities in California. So they basically bumped out a lot of the marketers. So they took a lot of the marketers' space that they were using to balance pricing. But you can see, either way, you took 51 BCF of storage capacity out of the market in August of 2021. And as soon as you did that, this orange line here is PG&E daily price. As soon as you did that, it almost directly correlates. You have a lot more volatility in the market as soon as you took out that 51 BCF of storage. So add on top of that the fact that they had this hot, dry summer and our pricing was up near $10, and they really didn't get their storage full. I'll show you the graph here in a minute. So that kind of, the storage is used to balance the market when there's high demand or big fluctuations. And without that storage, it just increases that volatility. The other thing going on in California, not to pick on California, but I'm a little biased right now. They've made this a hard winter for me. But they had, the outage wasn't in California, but they had reduced supply going into California because El Paso, again, back in August of 21, they had a major line. They had an explosion. The line's been out of service. They had to reduce the pressure on it and everything. That line was out of service until about February of this winter. So all summer long, beginning of the winter, they had reduced supply. That's Permian supply, and I've got a map here in a minute that goes into California. So that's from Texas, basically, and it wasn't going. They had a lot less supply going in there. Then you add in there the high demand from a cold winter, and it was kind of, in my mind, the perfect storm of conditions for us to have these high pricing throughout the winter. So how did we manage it? Partially with our storage. So here is our aquifer usage. I kind of show this graph every year, and I like these graphs because you can almost tell what's going on in my area by what's going on with storage every day, especially the aquifers, because these are kind of the peak. We use these kind of the top end of everything. So we have to have Colville and Leroy have to stay at about 50% over the summer. That's just to manage the facility. And Chalk Creek is basically empty over the summer. So we get to October and we are in filling mode. So we're basically filling our inventory. And here you can see this side has the inventory. So this is about full. So going into November, we're about full in our storage. We started seeing some of those really cold days and we started using the aquifers. The good thing is we can fill them back up. So we had some cold days, some high price days. We use them, we put the gas back in, we use them again, we put the gas back in. Here you can see kind of those December days that were a little bit warmer right there, end of December, early January. That's when we put some gas back in. We had that warm. Then we started using them again. Here is the middle of January. And then here is our cold days. So you can see we were using a whole lot of aquifer on that 30th day. That was pretty much the most, well, Uri had some high withdrawals out of the aquifers too. So it was very high withdrawals out of the aquifers. We had to put some back in, and then we use it again. We used them again here. This is kind of bringing Chalk Creek back down to where it sits for the summer, and we used it again here in March, or used the other two again in March, just to kind of get them to, we keep them at 70% going into the Clay Basin test. So as we look at Clay Basin, there's I think it's a 9-day period in April where we do not have access to Clay Basin. Nobody does. They shut in the facility for pressure testing. So we make sure that our aquifers are at 70%, or Leroy and Colville are at 70% so that we can either inject or withdraw. If we kept them completely full, then we'd have no flexibility to inject everything. If we kept them really low, then we'd have no to withdraw. So 70% is what we found is the sweet spot of those to kind of get them so that we have the flexibility on both ends. So here's Clay Basin. Pretty standard Clay Basin graph, right? Except that if you look, we were still filling going into the end of November. That's because with the pricing, the way we saw pricing all summer, we model it and we update our model with that pricing all summer long. And at $10 gas, it kept telling us, all the forecasts kept saying it's going to be cheaper next month, right? It'll always be cheaper next month. Then we get to next month and it goes, no, it's going to be cheaper next month now. So it kept putting off our storage injection. So we were kind of late in the game. Luckily, pricing did come down late fall, like September, October. Pricing did come down, and we got caught back up in storage. We were still in a good spot here at about 11 million dekatherms, so about 11 BCF in Clay Basin. 13.4 is the max, so we didn't quite max it out, but we still got to a good spot where we felt comfortable. You'll see a couple things that stick out. These two really big injection numbers. We did not just, those aren't data errors, and they're not just some weird anomaly that we got a whole lot into storage. We actually bought some gas in place in Clay Basin. So somebody else had it in their storage contract and either needed to get it out, maybe they had an interruptible contract, I'm not exactly sure why, but they offered to sell us. And one of them was a 750,000 decatherm purchase. So it was at a good price. We looked at the price and we said, this makes sense. It'll help give us a boost. And you could see the boost that it gave us in our inventory. So we did 2 of those purchases, helped get our storage into a good spot. Going into this winter, we were very glad we did some of those purchases because we were a little bit behind just because of where pricing was. John?
And so I'm assuming the Wex Pro, since that's doesn't vary with the market prices, that's what was going in while you were waiting for the market?
Yep, that we were still putting Wexpro in all summer long, and it's just, with Wexpro where it's at right now with only the 153, we still had some more injection space to put more in, and that's the purchases that were getting kind of pushed down the road, waiting for those prices to drop. Then if you look, the rest of it is just pretty standard. Our base load withdrawals out of the Clay Basin. Couple days here in the spring, that's where we kind of start going back and forth sometimes. You get warmer days, you get colder days. The one that I wanted to point out here, which is interesting, is in the middle of this, right around here, you're like, wasn't that your really cold day? Wasn't that your... So this goes back to, remember I said the cold day was a Monday, and we had to buy gas on Friday? So we had to set up that whole weekend looking to what Monday looked like, which meant that Friday or Saturday was actually going to be quite a bit warmer than the Monday. So we actually wound up having a pretty decent injection on Saturday just because we were buying the same amount of gas that we were buying for Monday for our biggest day. So that kind of gives you that feel for how difficult those 3-day weekends, or if a lot of times these events happen, fortunately it didn't here, like Uri and everything else, where it happens over a 4-day weekend because the markets close for holidays. So then we're buying 4 days worth of gas, which is even harder. So luckily this one was just a 3-day weekend.
But every weekend's a 3-day weekend.
Every weekend's a 3-day.
Right, because you're buying for Monday.
Except if it's a 4-day.
Except, yeah.
Or Thanksgiving, which is 5-day. So
Yeah, okay.
it's pretty tricky every weekend.
Right.
But that's where our storage comes in handy. The aquifers, Clay Basin, we're able to adjust, and that's I just thought was a really good example of that, where we wind up injecting one day. Just looking at historic and the IRP, so the green line is what we expected to do in our IRP with our storage. The blue line is what we actually did, and then the gray band is the 5-year average, and that the light blue is the actual 5-year average. The couple things that I wanted to point out here, if you notice this green line, and unfortunately we caught it after the IRP, but the model really wanted us to have, based on pricing forecasts and everything, the model said you're going to be empty in Clay Basin going into March. Operationally, we do not want to be empty going into Clay Basin at March. So you'll see this as a constraint that we've added to the model. It'll be in the IRP, but we added a constraint that said we want to have at least 1 BCF of storage in Clay Basin for March for operational reasons. You still get some cold days here and there in March. If we're completely empty, we've got nothing and we have no flexibility there. So we added that. So that kind of changed our dynamic here a little bit. That had us buying, it wanted us to buy more so that we used the model to tell us to bring it up to here. But if you look back, the IRP only had us getting not even at 10 BCF going into the winter. Luckily, we update that model and we were still behind it. So we started off in June, so we put in an estimate for June when we do the IRP modeling. We put in an estimate into the model where we expect Clay Basin to be on June 1st. If you remember back, pricing was really high in May, so we didn't put in as much into Clay Basin as we thought we were going to. So we started off at a deficit. Just starting on June 1st, we were already had less gas in Clay Basin than we thought, because pricing was different than we thought. So all summer it kept saying, hold off, hold off, hold off. And then towards September, that's when we started increasing our purchasing, because pricing kind of came back down a little bit in September, October. We were able to catch back up to where the IRP wanted us. Once we had that constraint in there, now it wanted us to buy a little bit more gas to kind of bump up from that low level of sub 10 and get it to a better level, and that's kind of where we did for the winter. And then we were setting a floor for the 5-year average for pretty much the whole first half of the year, and then kind of got it right back into the middle range. So we didn't go anywhere that was like extremely high or anything. We got back to kind of our average spot for where our storage would be, and then wound up kind of drawing down at a pretty strong rate based on what pricing was at.
Well, that big 750 purchase, that little vertical section, what price was that at?
I want to say it was, I don't remember exactly, I want to say it was somewhere around, what's that? I thought somebody said. I want to say it was around $8, somewhere around there, $8 or $9, somewhere in that range. I don't know exactly, but we did run that through the model, see if it wanted it, and it definitely did based on where projections for pricing were at that point. And it worked out pretty well. If you compared the $8 line on that graph there, it was, the model actually helped us out there and told us a good thing. So, and that wasn't something we could have planned into the IRP. We didn't know that was available. Somebody came to us with that offer. We were able to go back, look at it, model it, and say, yeah, based on where we expect things to be, we think this is a good play for us right now. So let's look at the U.S. storage. So again, we're back on our island here. This is total U.S. storage. And as you can see, everybody kind of was low going into the winter. Storage in general was low. That's why pricing was high. Caught back up in the fall, in November. And now U.S. storage is sitting in a pretty strong position towards the top end of the 5-year average. Unfortunately, these graphs tell a little bit of a different story. The top left graph here is the mountain region, so that's kind of our storage. That's Clay Basin stuff in the west here. This is going back to 2010. That's small, so I'll tell you where that is. But this is every year. You kind of see up and down, up and down. This is going into the winter. We were in a good spot, not at the top of the historical, but not at the bottom either. So we were in a pretty good spot going into it. We drew out pretty strong, and now we're towards the bottom end, not like the lowest, but we're pretty far down in terms of our storage at this point. We've started, you can see the little uptick has started there, meaning we've started injection season now, but we were low. Clay Basin was really low. We were basically empty at Clay Basin. Most of the other shippers in Clay Basin were low, which makes sense because everybody was pulling their cheaper gas out of storage because pricing was so high.
I know your data only goes through March, but we're having a colder than average April. Does that impact injections, planned injections in April?
Yes, it does. This actually goes through. So this was updated this week. So the storage reports are about a week behind. So they come out every Thursday. This one is through April 14th. So it is through April 14th, and you could still see we are starting to inject, even though you're right, it has been colder and injections haven't been as strong. But the mountain region has started to inject. There was definitely a delay here as I'm getting to the Pacific region chart. There's a flat spot. They went through about 2 or 3 weeks there where they weren't injecting, they weren't withdrawing. They kind of bottomed out at about 72 BCF in storage, which was, if we're looking at the Pacific region graph now, you can see they hit about 72 BCF of gas in storage, and that's as low as you get for the last 13 years on this chart. The other interesting things I wanted to point out on this chart is you can see it's kind of a 2-hump peak of where they get their storage to. There's I guess a little bump in there for some reason. I'm not that familiar with why. But look at 2021. It looks like somebody cut the top off of that. It's because somebody cut the top off of it. August of 21, they took 51 BCF out of their storage portfolio. So yeah, they cut the top off. And then with the high prices that we saw in June, they didn't start off in a bad position. They just didn't ever get it full to where they normally do. So your peak is going to be a little bit lower now than it has been historically because they've taken storage out of play, and they just didn't fill it. So now with the strong withdrawals, they got to historically low places. Michelle?
So I'm going to ask a question, but answer it where later or now, whatever.
Okay.
But so I'm just learning today that it really, and I'm sure you said it to me before because I've seen parts of this several times now, but that it really was PG&E who did it, who cut that storage. So it wasn't California entirely.
No, PG&E.
It was just one utility.
Yeah,
made this
but
decision.
it's all part of the California storage picture. But it was
Yeah.
PG&E's decision. They
So
went into the
other
regulators.
utilities in California did not make that decision to get rid
Correct.
of working
Right.
storage.
But they were impacted because they've done it. And like I said, now PG&E went out to the market.
We should be more focused in our criticism and not aim it all the way towards
Okay.
California. I'm just coming
No,
to
that's-
that realization because I've given my fair share of criticism.
But the rest of this, it's not just that PG&E deficit, right? The rest of this, they still could have gotten it higher,
it's still
right?
showing a picture of storage down, even if we put
Even if you took that
vision
out.
on.
So that's
what I'm trying to understand.
just one piece of the puzzle. The overall piece is they really just didn't get it high, right? This peak right here can be higher, right? If you go up here and just take 51 BCF out, you're still up here.
Yeah.
And they didn't get there. So it's
Okay,
not
that's
just that
helpful.
piece.
Thanks for that.
Okay.
I mean, if you added the 51 BCF onto the end of that chart, you'd still be
Still be low.
low range,
Yeah.
lower than average.
Exactly.
So probably everyone's lowering storage, and PG&E cut 50.
But and they're low in storage because they had less supply going in,
Yeah.
right? They had that line out, so less supply, and pricing was high. So just like we were delayed, all the forecasts, all the services, all your forward curves all showed it's going to be cheaper next month.
Right.
So hold off because you kept looking at it and saying, "Oh, I'm paying $8 today, but it's telling me next month I'm going to be paying $6. So I'm going to wait till next month and not buy it now." And that just getting kicked down the road until it's like, okay, we got to get gas in storage, and everybody kind of started filling up in the fall, but it was too late, especially for them to get
Right.
full.
Okay. Thanks for that extra.
I got a question too related to that. So given this current state of meteorological science, while we're looking at the storage picture and the forward curve, price curve picture, is there a meteorological picture that we can be taking or attempting to construct that would tell us that 5 months from now there's a likelihood of cold spikes like we haven't seen in the last 30 years?
I think there are some reports out there that have said we are likely to have more volatility. I don't know that, I'm not going to get into climate change and say whether it's going to be, overall warmer and colder, but I think everybody's in agreement that, the past few years we've seen a lot more volatility with the weather and a lot more extreme colds, extreme warms, and going back and forth. And I think that is something we have to plan for. I can't put a numerical value on that and tell you what what exactly it's going to mean, but there is definitely a lot more volatility in the weather, and we've got a plan for that with our storage and with our other options.
Makes your job a lot more challenging.
It does. It does. I like it when, and it's fun. I point back to, and I want to say it was 2014, where we had a really, it was like a 2-week cold snap that was cold every single day, and everyone was like, this is awful, and it was an inversion, and they're like, how are you doing with the gas supply? I'm like, this is easy, because every day was exactly the same. We were in an inversion, and it was cold, so our demand was way up, but we were just buying the same packages of gas for like 2 weeks straight. And I'm like, as long as it does, the fluctuations are the hard part. When it's going to be the same tomorrow as it is today, and you don't even get a lot of fluctuations throughout the day, because sometimes we get bit by the, it's really cold in the morning, but the sun comes out, and then it gets warmer, and then it's cold, really cold at night. But during those inversion times, when it's the same every day, it's miserable to live through. But for us, it's easy to predict. The volatility in the weather is what really makes it hard to predict. When it's going to be 60 degrees one day and it's going to be 20 the next, that's hard for us. That's where you're bouncing back and forth, and so that's going to be trickier. And I think we need to think reliability, right? And we've kind of done that with the LNG facility, so that helps us. But we've got to think storage. We've got to think access to, those weather events are somewhat geographic, right? The storm, like if we look at Elliott, it was hitting just the East Coast. They kind of move their way through to different geographic regions. So when we start talking about hedging, one of the things we want to do is start trying to geographically diversify where we buy our supply. Right now, we get all of our supply here from the Rockies. There are pipelines now that go other places. We're starting to reach out and work with those other pipelines to say, how do we diversify where we're getting our gas? Not just trying to say, okay, we're going to buy all fixed price contracts or anything. We're starting to get into the hedging. But that's something that we want to look at, because, the weather is more volatile, and we could have a big storm here. But like you saw with Uri back in February, it really hit the middle continent, but if you looked on the East Coast, they were fine. They didn't have the same pricing issues we had, because that storm moves its way across. So if we can start reaching other basins, it might help isolate us from
And
that.
so accessing other basins, other hubs, is there, do the pathways exist?
Yes, sort of.
For you to do that?
Yeah, we've got a couple slides when I get into hedging. We're jumping ahead here into the hedging discussion. But like I said earlier, it all kind of flows together, right? We're doing the hedging because of a lot of the stuff we're seeing here. So it was really good. Other than having to listen to me for a really long time, I think these three conversations all went together pretty well. So we'll get to it. John?
So just a question on the volatility. Looking at your experience this year, how much of the volatility could you accommodate through storage withdrawals versus daily spot?
I think a lot of it, but we're definitely out looking for more storage, and we're going to talk about that. Is that we actually did sign up for some more storage that came available, so we are looking at trying to accommodate more of it. Because right now you saw that peak on the aquifer thing, that was basically to taking everything out of the aquifers we could. We had,
that was the hard
if you look at it on. Probably the most we can get out of the aquifers for our supply needs, some of it gets built into the firm peaking stuff, but is about 135. And then our MRD at Clay Basin that we can count on any day is about 111. So about 150, or 250 of storage is at about our max. And on that high send out day, you saw we were at 226. And the only reason there's an adjustment is because no notice adjusts our storage. So if we happen to buy a little bit extra supply, it'll adjust down our storage. So we were basically planning to take everything we could out of storage on that day. But it was an injection 2 days before. So we have quite a bit of flexibility thanks to the storage we have. But we love our storage. I will tell you all day long, especially, and if you forget how much we love our storage, we are reminded every year when they do the Clay Basin test and our storage is not there. It is difficult every day to know exactly how much you're going to use, and especially on weekends where you're predicting on a weather forecast that's 2 days out. or 3 days out. So we are reminded every year how valuable our storage is for meeting those fluctuations. And so the more storage we can get, the happier I am. LNG makes me really happy. I like having that there. So I think we're going to be good going forward, but we'll talk more about that. Let's table it for a second. Which we're getting there, because these are our takeaways. This is our final slide on the heating season. High demand due to prolonged cold, 2 of the highest send-out days, and then a whole bunch of additional high send-out days thrown in there just for fun. Cost of service production is lagging slightly behind the IRP forecast, but we are seeing signs that is gonna change. Their drilling program shows that that's gonna change, and I think we talked about that at the last meeting, the drilling program. Increased price volatility was isolated to the west, but it could happen anywhere, but it happened to happen here to us this year. We do expect that to continue, and we want to be prepared for it. And then the national storage is near the top of the 5-year band, but our regional is not. So those are kind of the takeaways from the heating season. Any other questions on the heating season? I mean, at least this year, like, there's been a couple years in there where I'm like struggling to find interesting things to talk about from the heating season. Not the problem this year. It was there was never a dull moment.
Just on a quick question on the kind of the 3-day weekend projection. At what amount of time out do you start just relying on, seasonal averages versus, because once you get a few weeks out, I imagine it's almost, like you said, projection gets a lot easier the closer it is.
So we pay for some longer out forecasts. So we use kind of the average. So if we look what our model does, so we update our model every week, and we will use there's actually, I guess, 3 levels of forecast. Well, 2 levels of forecast in there. So for the longer term, we use averages. So anything above 60 days. So then we pay for a service that gives us a 60-day forecast. So we'll update the 60-day forecast. So take your baseline is your average. We'll update the next 60 days to that 60-day forecast that we get. And obviously the next week or so is probably the most dialed in. So, and we update that every week to kind of get new guidance based on, because the IRP is based on an average, right? That green line that we saw is based on average temperatures, which you never really get average. So we update it to kind of keep up with things. So we update it with pricing, we update it with what the actual forecast is for the next 60 days. So anything out from
Thank you.
So you have a short-term weather forecast as well?
The short term is kind of built into that, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's a 60-day forecast, but I'd say the probably the first week or so is more dialed in than the end of the 60.
But it's forecasting every day of that 60 days?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And we get a lot of weather service information, we look at local, depending on the day. There are some days where our local forecasts are better than kind of the industry ones that they look at. Like honestly, they don't understand the inversion as well as our local weather forecasters do. So there are times when if it's going to be an inversion, we'll tend to go with the local forecast sometimes ahead of our weather service because they don't really understand the inversion. So, and we have a lot of historical data we rely on as well. And that's the expertise that I really count on from my folks that have been doing this for a little while and things that we've learned over the years and kind of built into our daily forecasting.
And then you said, so for clarification on the first of month pricing, those contracts that lock it in for the whole month, those are being set by other companies that are putting their prices in, right?
The index is set. We choose the contracts that we want. So that's the RFP process that's going on now. That's what we're going to report on, is it next Tuesday? It's the 2nd. That's that RFP process where we lock in all those baseload and peaking contracts at either first of month or monthly daily index pricing based on where we expect those indexes to be. But then each month the index is actually set by what's going on in the market.
Okay, so assumably like some of those, the index being set, people are putting in their prices and they probably have their own models too that are trying to judge where the overall market is.
There's a lot of questions about January as to why that got set where it was, and a lot of people can. I have kind of what I've explained, what I know on those facts, but other people have other theories and stuff, and I'm not going to get into those. I'm not going to speculate. Let's say that. Okay, we ready to talk about hedging? So Coming out of last year's IRP, this is kind of where our portfolio was. Again, we've got the different types of contracts. So we have, this is a peak day, so a design day, sorry, is about 20% out of storage, 12% would be from Wexpro, 14% would be those baseload first of month contracts. We consider all that to be hedged. Then we've also got some baseload index contracts, which are on the not hedged. There was only one contract that we did at a particular location that was it was based on a daily index instead of the monthly. So and then we have our peaking contracts, and then spot gas. All of that is subject to the daily index market. We considered that not hedged at all. It's whatever's going on. The rest we considered hedged. So about 46 hedged and 54%. This was out of the IRP. If you look at a typical winter day, that changed to 54% hedged and 36% not hedged. That's because what we would assume is that we pull a little bit less of our spot contracts. There's less spot gas.
Just to clarify, your base first of the month, you're not locked in on prices on that.
No.
So
but
that's-
it has been considered a hedge.
Right,
Yes.
but that's not locked in on price.
Maybe this needs to be purple here. It is
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
You're right.
Because I think you need to clarify that, because that is not price locked like the other portion.
It is not. It is not a fixed price, but it has been considered a hedge, and that's where this winter kind of turns things on its head, right? I showed that graph of we've always considered that a hedge, but you can get in trouble if that hedge goes upside down, which it did. So yeah, maybe going forward, that's a good suggestion. I'll make this one purple.
It's a supply hedge, and it's
a volume hedge, but
Yeah.
not
yeah.
not price.
Well,
But
I would say it's a volatility hedge, right?
It
I mean,
is.
traditionally, it's kept prices more stable than if you just bought them on spot, with the exception of January of this year.
Right. But that has been, and that was, we brought that up in the past when we said, when we talked about our different options, because one of the options we looked at was, hey, do we want to do more of these first of month contracts? That was one of our proposals that we went with, and we didn't go forward with that one. Luckily, we didn't go forward with that because one of the caveats we put is this is still subject to pricing. Like you could wind up with a higher monthly index price than your spot gas, which is exactly what happened in January. But yeah, so I think you're right.
And also February. It wasn't
February
as,
too.
as extreme, but it's still.
Still, February was the same. You're right. I just think of January just because of how extreme it was.
Yeah.
So that's my example. But I wouldn't put this in the completely non-hedged section either. So I think it's purple.
I like it. Let's add a purple category.
More of a purple guy, I guess. Okay. So these are the options we considered then. So this is going back in time. This is coming out of last year's IRP, right? We looked at increasing Wexpro, cost of service production. They're increasing their drilling program. They're out looking potentially for properties that have production, so that we were in that same boat there. We said we're going to look at increasing storage contracts. Unfortunately, there weren't any available at the time. We didn't wind up doing that. Purchasing financial instruments, there's just not that much of a market to get something that's locked in right here, because they basis adjust everything. And then increased first of month baseload contracts. That was, again, another option we looked at. We didn't go with. What we did go with was buying some fixed price baseload contracts. That's the $77,000 that we talked about. The way we did that, the year before, if you remember, we had a meeting set up here to go over exactly when, okay, we set, we're going to do the RFP on this date. We're going to have a meeting here. We're going to go over the responses. We're going to get back to them. There's a lot of time lag in there. When we're locking fixed price contracts in, you've got to move quickly. So we actually sent the RFP out and said, we're going to do this tomorrow. So we waited for the right day, said, okay. And we've talked to our suppliers. They knew it was coming. It wasn't like it came out of the blue. So they knew it was coming. We said, we're just going to time it when we think is a good time. So we watched the market, and you'll see what was going on. Sent it out one day. The next day, July 14th at 9 a.m., said bids are due, and we're going to keep them open for 3 hours. So we had 3 hours to do our credit reviews, to do our analysis. Really you're just comparing pricing and locations at that point. And so we sent it out to suppliers. That's kind of how we did it.
Chairman? 77,000, was that 77,000 a day for a specified number of days?
Yes, February, or December through March. Or December through February, so the first day of December, last day of February. So this is what we were watching to determine when. So we were looking at the forward curves and so the December, February average. So we're looking at what pricing was doing. And starting in May, it was, it was above $8. We watched it go up to $10. And we're saying, oh man, we're gonna be buying these hedges at $12, $14 somewhere for winter at that point. But we continued to watch it, see what was happening. Luckily, in July, we saw those forward contracts start to decline. And that's when we said, okay, this is why we wanted that flexibility to be able to just say, we're going to watch the market, see when a good time to act is, and then act with that RFP when it makes sense. So we saw it go down. This was pretty much the July 4th weekend right in here. Came back from July 4th weekend or whatever and saw them starting to go up. As soon as we saw them starting to go up, we said, okay, this is when we need to act. We sent it out and said, tomorrow's our RFP, respond now. So we got it locked in down here while prices were low, and then they proceeded to go back up over $10 over the next month. So that's where that flexibility and ability for us to act when the market makes sense is key to me, because we were able to do that. And if we had set a date and said, okay, February or September 2nd, we're going to do our RFP and we're going to plan everything around that and just arbitrarily pick that date, we would have been buying above $10. And probably with risk built into that deal, probably $12 instead of $8.
And we might have liked it in January.
Yeah, we might have liked it in January. Yeah, we still probably would have made out okay, but not as good as $8. So this is that same breakdown of our supply on a peak day and a typical winter day with that 77,000 added in. Granted, I haven't had a chance to update this to purple, so we'll just say it's purple. But you can see that increased our hedged amount to over 50%. We felt better about that. We'll have to talk now about what we want to do with that. We'll call it the purple piece, right? Because the way our RFP works is we're still going to do those deals. Again, with the way we model our supply and the way we model our RFP, which is running right now as we speak. So by Tuesday, you'll know what we're getting. But it's still going to pick baseload contracts with first month pricing. We can't really put fixed pricing in there because we don't know what those fixed price deals are. Again, with that 3 hours to lock in those deals, that there's no way for us to really model that in the RFP as part of this whole process. So we're still doing it the same. We are going to wind up with fixed first of month contracts. We can then look at what we want to do with those afterwards, like we did for February. If we want to lock in some of those at a fixed price, we can try and convert some of them and see if the counterparties will do that, which they've been open to in the past. So we can look at converting that, but we will wind up with some fixed price or with some first of month.
So Will, I just missed it. So what part of the pie did your $8 contract fit in? Was it base fixed?
Yep, that's the base fix right there. Yep.
Is there a possibility of structuring a contract where it's first of the month with a cap on it?
You can start getting into some of those financial. It's called a collar. So yeah, you can start getting into some of those. That's going into some of those financial products and stuff. So it's a little trickier.
You'll pay for that.
You'll definitely pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
you'll pay for
so-
it.
Less than $50.
Right, but I mean, you have to look over time, right? A solid hedging program will be layered and will have different products in it.
And that is a great point. Like again, that's where I want to go with this. Is I don't think there's one solution to this problem, right? We've got to take little pieces here and there and do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. There's not one carte blanche. The other thing I think that's key there is, look at the past. These hedges don't owe it. Like we're about to see that our $8 hedge worked out great, right? But this year we saved a lot of money for customers with that $8 hedge this year. But if you look back to last year, which actually, if I remember right, was a lower priced hedge, and it did not save customers money. So it's an insurance policy, right? I mean, that's all the hedge is supposed to be. We're not trying to play the market to win or lose. It is an insurance policy against these high price events. And I think that's a key point.
Well, you're issuing it on July 13th was playing the market. I mean, so you're.
Right. There is some.
You're saying we want an insurance policy based on these general principles, but we only want to pull the trigger when we think we're in the best position to pull the trigger.
Right.
Right.
But I think that goes back to what I always think my responsibility is, which is to get the best price also for customers, right? So, I mean, that's with everything we do is we're trying to do things, even though, like, I'm not out there trying to make any money in the market, but I am trying to get the best price for my customers at all times. So let's look at that fixed price hedge. We did this last year, so I wanted to do it this year because I'm happier to present it this year than I was last. The total cost of those fixed price contracts actually came to $55.5 million, which was more than they were last year, even though we went from 80,000 to 77,000. But if we had bought that index price, if we would have waited and just said, okay, that's going to be spot gas, that spot gas at index pricing, and some of it was at White River Hub, so it would be against White River Hub pricing, and the rest was at Opal. So I've calculated it both and said if we would have bought that same price or same gas at those pricing indexes, just the flat index, would have cost us $99 million. So the savings this year was just under $44 million for customers by doing that hedge. But again, it's a hedge. We did the same thing last year, and we didn't. It's an insurance policy. This year, we kind of cashed in our insurance policy, and it helped with $77,000. $77,000 that would have been spot prices, which in December was where most of that. If you look here, it's this December pricing. That's where you had your really steep line here in terms of your savings. So savings actually goes negative. So the lower this line is, the more savings. So we saw a lot of savings in December, some still in February, in January, and then in February we kind of gave some of that back because pricing did go lower. So it does go both ways. But I like the reliability of the baseload contract, knowing that we're going to get the gas. But also, this is kind of a good way to put a collar on some of that gas, right? Where we know at least 77,000, we're paying this much for it.
And, well, is it true that I think your graphs show that even though we haven't seen a January first of month pricing before, we are seeing more volatility in the market in the last few years than we did previous?
Absolutely. That's how this started, right? That's why we started kind of bringing this more hedging program, because for a while we just said Wexpro's our hedge. That's enough.
Right, because it's an insurance policy. We can talk about generally you want layered, you want different things, but you also have to respond to market conditions.
Yeah.
If we start seeing more Januaries, I think we'll see fewer first of month.
So that's a good point. And so this is, I said, what if we had done those first of month instead? That same 77,000, right? That with at an index. So this isn't comparing it to our $8. This is saying, okay, index price versus if we had hedged it with a first of month contract here, would have cost us $176 million at the current Opal first of month pricing. And so that would have cost us $76 million. So when we look at our different options for fixed price or this, or even the daily spot, we have to remember those indexes can move. So
where did you end up then compared to that chart? What was your actual?
Right here. So this is what we did. So
you're at 43 million or 44 million savings. So, okay, and that's saving off of the total cost index price?
Yes.
But it could have even been worse than that on the next slide?
The next slide shows if we would have done, because remember we talked about what options we looked at?
Right.
One of the options was to do more first of month pricing. So all I did here was say if we had done first of month pricing instead of fixed pricing for this 77,000, where would we have been? And it would have gone the other way if we had done first of month pricing. And that's just because the first of month pricing
you would have been at the 176.
Yeah. Now, if you would look at it though, it's kind of the opposite of what we saw. Our savings, we would have been doing really well if we would have done first month pricing through December, right? We would have been saving $80 million at that point through December. But then it would have given it all back in January.
So I'm just trying to understand how you could have issued an RFP in July asking for first of month pricing from December to February.
Yes.
You could, okay.
We could have done that too. Instead, we did the RFP and did it at fixed pricing. So this was just one option we had considered, something I don't think we want to consider. So as we talk now about what are our options for next year, right? So coming out of this, we're a little ahead of ourselves because we got to see where our RFP contracts and stuff are for this year coming out of our IRP process, right? But then the things we want to consider are, Wexpro, increasing Wexpro, bring them up to the 55% or get closer to the 55%. They are working on that with the drilling program and trying to see if they can get any additional existing production. We will probably look at doing more fixed load based contracts, same thing. We'll see how much volume we get out of the RFP and kind of sometime over the summer probably do the same type thing. And I think we will wind up doing some of this, right? One thing to be weary of is, we had 250,000 of baseload contracts at first month pricing. We cannot go into the market and say we want to buy 250,000 worth of fixed price contracts. We will drive the market up if we do that. We will be making the market by doing that. So could we layer in some of it? Yes, and we'd want to do that in smaller chunks. I think even the 77,000 is a big chunk to go in. But if we were to say we're going to do 300,000 in the market and buy it at a fixed price, we're going to push that market way up. John, did you have a...
How far out can you buy those? You've got that current forward curve there at 2.
We can go pretty far out. Those curves go 10 years and there's 20-year curves too. So we could buy a couple years out.
Well, I mean, this price right here on this slide of $4 to $7 in the winter, is that what you're currently
That's what
seeing?
we're currently seeing, yes. That's where those forward curves are for next winter right now. So I didn't put the forward curve on here just because I did want to keep this as a non-confidential slide, so I just kind of put generic on here. But yeah, we're seeing $2 to $3 gas in the summer is what they're showing right now, and then $4 to $7 gas in the winter. So when you look at those spreads, those are some key numbers when we go to the next bullet point, which is looking at increased storage capacity. So there's still some good spreads over the next 5 or 6 years. Good spreads meaning that like good amount, like $2 to $4 spreads, or $2 to $5 spreads, I guess, in there. So there's some cost variance between summer and winter. So we've looked at increasing our storage capacity. Again, I think what we have to do is a little bit of multiple things, right? Instead of one solution, all fixed price or all storage.
Have you got a slide for us that says what this picture would have looked like if you'd started with the full LNG tank?
Don't, because again, that's the LNG is for supply reliability, right? So
you wouldn't have used it.
It wouldn't have. So the biggest thing that impacted us is the fixed price or the first of month baseload contracts, which regardless of how we used our LNG and storage with those contracts in place, we were paying the same amount. We could have reduced, if we used it, we could have used it in December on those $50 days if we wanted to do that. But to be honest, once we use it, we've used it. We have, 8 days? So that was December. Those $50 prices happened in early December. So looking back, if I'm not going to use that LNG for my 8 days in early December and not have it for the rest of the winter.
Mm-hmm.
So
How long does it take to fill it?
Because it takes all summer to fill it.
But you do need to empty it, right?
No.
30%.
30%. So we would use some, but again, I'm going to hold that off until later in the season, right? Not December, because if I use it, I can't just. It's not like the aquifers.
The primary function is
supply reliability.
And you're going to reserve it for that. Well, there's got to be some situation where you
absolutely
maybe March, maybe February, or.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if you've got 30% that you need to use.
Yes.
Have you internally thought about a decision rule about at what time in the year you're willing to just?
I don't want to set that like as a rule, but yes, we would absolutely consider it under all conditions as to when we want to do it. But we have to keep in mind that its primary function is for supply reliability.
Well, but I mean, you'd have the other 70% of it for
Yeah.
reliability.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm not saying we wouldn't use it. I'm just saying I would be a little more hesitant. You know, looking back, it's easy to say, oh, use it in December because look what happened at day prices. Look what else happened the rest of the winter, right? But
Oh, I'm not curious about saying you should have or shouldn't. I'm just curious that if you had an internal discussion about
yes.
how you would decide to make that decision.
Yes, we've had lots, and
I view it a little differently than Will, so.
yeah, it would yeah.
How do you view it, Kelly?
Let's just say I would not be the only
I
one
think
making
price
that
should be a
decision.
consideration.
Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, what will probably happen as we use this is it's going to be a room full of people like me and Will, and we're going to be sitting down and looking
And
at the
Matt
situation.
and Judd
Yeah,
and everybody else will be
and-
making that decision.
And saying, okay, did we pull the trigger or not? And I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we said we'd have a manual that, a decision tree.
Right.
I think we just look at it on a case-by-case basis and make the decision.
And I say, like, as a rule of thumb, the later we get into heating season, the more likely we are to.
Exactly.
To use it, yeah.
Yes.
So
I
has
would
it been drawn down now?
We'll get to the.
Yeah.
We'll,
He'll answer all those questions.
I'm taking enough time already. I gotta.
That's got a
Was there another question?
Yeah, so do you guys sell tickets to that competition?
Sorry, so generally when you use the word storage, you're referring to the aquifers, not including.
Aquifers, clay basin, and whatever other storage. So let's.
But not LNG.
Not
You
LNG.
don't use the word storage to refer to that.
A serious comment. Your summer prices and your winter prices, the 2.3 and then your 4.7. And if you're putting it all into storage, you do have storage costs and stuff though too that you have to
Right.
consider. Because it's just not, well, then let's just buy everything at $2. What's the matter here? Because you do have storage costs and holding costs.
And all of that is built into our modeling that we use. That's why that's not done based on $2 to $3. That's we're using all the curves. We've got standard deviations built in. Like there's a lot of optimization stuff that goes into that model, which is why this whole RFP process happens. And then coming out of that though, if we want to look at doing anything different, we just got to see where that RFP puts us first. Doug?
Can I make a suggestion? We keep talking about the Wexpro production, but now we're really talking about the winter heating season.
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about Wexpro, it's an annual amount.
Right.
And we're talking apples and oranges. When we talk about the Wexpro production, can we talk about the impact that it has on the winter heating season? It's not 55%.
No. But that's I mean, going back to that graph, right? It's on a peak day it's 12%.
Right.
Well, plus the storage.
Plus the storage that you.
Plus the stuff that's in storage.
But that's what I think we need to focus on and keep them the same time frames and see the impact of Wexpro has in the winter heating season and not keep saying, we're at 55%, because we're not. And that's what we need to plan for is the heating season.
But you can't Wexpro doesn't go up and down like that.
Right.
So
Maybe we need to use both terms.
But yes, I agree.
Because I see what you're saying, but just having lived through the 70% Wexpro when it was $5 above market, I don't want us to solve today's problem and revisit yesterday's problem.
Exactly.
But I think we need to focus and have the impact of Wexpro during the heating season.
Right.
And look at that impact.
And which would we do? We pick the percentage on an average winter day?
Yeah. Well, just like it is on there. I mean,
Well, that's what when we model Wexpro, we model it by how much is each.
Maybe
period,
useful
like,
just
month.
for the lexicon, just to start to get a sense that if it's 55% of average annual, that it translates into 16% on
yes
on an average winter day. Maybe if we start to use both numbers, it starts to give
And
us a sense.
That's kind of where this graph came out of, right? We wanted to show that we don't have, by having even 55% of Wexpro, we don't have that much of a hedge on a peak day or a winter day.
Right.
And that's kind of where this graph started, is showing that we're not 55% hedged because we have Wexpro.
And this is a very helpful slide. last time you presented it, you only presented the peak day, and I really like seeing both those. I think that's really helpful.
All right, so let's try, I know I'm taking up a lot of time here, but I want to cover a couple things here. So the next two are increased storage capacity is another option we can look at. And then, as I mentioned earlier, geographic diversification of supply, including access to additional storage facilities. We're going to talk about that in transportation and storage, so I'm going to not jump ahead. So increased storage, we actually took some action on this. The Spire Storage West, who's made a lot of improvements. They combined in the Clear Creek facility into what used to be the Rickman facility. They've done a great job out there with how they operate that now. They did an open season for 6 BCF of storage capacity, about 6 million decatherms. We submitted a bid for all 6. We said we'd like it. We modeled it. Our model liked it. It has those spreads. It's got the detail in there of all the forward curves, where we think pricing's going to go. With our bid that we put in, we did not get all 6. We actually did get, and you'll see here soon, that we were awarded 2 BCF of storage, so that'll be an additional 22,000 decatherms of withdrawal capability. We did a 5-year term. Question?
Really quick, I think that answers my earlier question. Are you the only ones thinking about increasing storage?
No.
And the answer is probably everyone is?
Absolutely not.
And then could you just, where is this located geographically?
Basically, Kemmerer,
Oh, okay.
like Wyoming, so just north of Evanston.
I'm not Kemmerer.
And we have the takeaway capacity, so it'll take away onto Mountain West Pipeline, so it actually works pretty well with us. Question?
What level of Wexpro production will your current storage support without having to shut in wells? Like, at what point do you have to increase?
We can go up to about the 65% level, which I want to say is probably around 200,000. Don't quote me exactly on that, but it's somewhere around 200,000 a day. So we can increase significantly. The where that 65% level came from is at 65%, and this is without this storage layered in. So this will actually help that a little bit. I think we could actually now, with this storage layered in, we could probably get close to the 65% without any shut-ins. But where that originally came from is with our storage contracts that were in place, prior to this. That 65% level would have only minor shut-ins that are at the lowest carrying cost. So that's how that 65% really came about. Chris?
So this storage is connected enough that any of your producing assets can go into it.
Yep, it is connected to, it's actually really well connected. It's connected to Overthrust Pipeline, it's connected to Ruby Pipeline, it's connected to Kern River's pipeline. There's some limitations on Kern River, and it's also connected to Northwest Pipeline and Mountain West Pipeline. So it's got a lot of connections. It's not far from our system.
So this injection capability is fully utilizable by you whenever.
Right now, yep. Well, April of 24 when this starts.
Sure.
So I don't think I put that on there. Is the contract starts next April.
5-year term with ability to renew before it goes out for bid?
We do not have ROFR rights on that one. They did not want to do it. They are, and to be honest,
very bullish.
That's exactly what I was going to say. They're bullish on their storage. They, a lot of times with storage and transportation contracts, and this was one of my questions for them is, we can sometimes go out longer term because our demand isn't going anywhere. Right, we're a longer term play as an LDC than some of these marketers who want 1 year, 6 months, stuff like that. I said, will that help us to go out further? And he said, no, because we are bullish on where storage is going, and they really think that there's more value in the further out curves in storage than we're seeing right now. So, and they got quite a bit of response. Honestly, I think 2 of the reasons that we got the 2 BCF that we did. Well, one is, we actually didn't get it at our original bid. We actually they came back to us and we had to go in a little again. But I think where we interconnect, the fact that we have takeaway capacity and stuff, I think helped. The fact that we are a pretty solid counterparty to do business with, I think played into it. So we're feeling pretty good about getting some additional storage. So we are still out there looking for more. Doug?
Do you know who got the other 4 BCF?
I don't yet. I looked I didn't look this morning. I looked last week, and I didn't see who got the others yet, or what prices they got it at. So I don't know that any of this is actually on the board, but I have a confirmation, so I know it's.
We've held contracts at this facility in the
This
past,
is,
right?
yeah, this is Rickman. It used to be Rickman, right? Where the prior owners had a lot of issues. They've had it long enough now. They've kind of got a lot of that dialed in. So they've been operating pretty well. The other thing we're looking at doing, our aquifer contracts expire in 2023. We are planning to extend those for another 5 years. Those do have renewal rights on them. But let's see, and then
What's that capacity again?
they're technically just under 2 BCF of storage, high deliverability. So they'll do about 185 of withdrawal, but we use about 50 of that as part of our firm peaking service. So consider about 135 of withdrawal on a day. Let's see, the next thing, additional LNG capacity. There are no plans really to do this right now. Matt and Dan are probably going, you're doing what? But we've talked about looking at the magnesite, seeing if we can build additional tank or anything out there. No plans in place for this right now. It's just something that's always kind of a potential that's out there. And obviously you guys would hear about it before we went anywhere with that. The other note I wanted to make is a lot of this stuff.
Can I go back? That top line there?
Yeah.
You got current expiration in just a few months.
Yep.
Are you doing anything about that?
Yes, that we are planning to renew that.
Okay.
Here soon. Yep. I honestly, I just wanted to wait till I talked about it in here before I did it.
Okay.
So, in case anybody had any issues they wanted to bring up, I kind of wanted to talk about it here before I move forward. But yeah, you'll be seeing that in this year's IRP that we've probably extended those.
Well, so in the previous one, you said they wouldn't go beyond 5 years. Is there a reason this one isn't going beyond 5 years?
From what I've been told, they're willing to go 5 years. So I don't know if they're as bullish or they like having us as a customer.
I mean, they won't do a 10?
They might, but if we have right of first refusal, I'd rather keep it at a reasonable time frame. I don't want to go in and have to do it every year, but at the same point, I don't want to.
So on this one, currently, we have right of first refusal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. All right, I got to go moving quickly because I'm cutting into Dan's time here in a minute, I think. The other point I wanted to make is that all this stuff that we do for hedging, whether it's a baseload contract, additional storage, it's also key that it's there for reliability, right? We, especially the storage, it's our gas. We're not fighting for it for others. Baseload gas is committed to us. We're not out there. We're reducing how much we have to go. The tough days are when we're going into the market and trying to buy a lot of spot gas, right? Because we're in there fighting with everybody else to buy it. So a lot of these things kind of double as both a reliability play as well as a hedge. I just wanted to make that. And it was very evident to me if you think back to this March and how it was really cold. You were talking about cold in April. It was cold in March. Well, a lot of our baseload contracts ended in February. So when March came around, we were buying 500,000-600,000 decatherms a day in the spot market. Not fun. We're fighting for every decatherm at that point. So we like some of these contracts being in place for just that reliability side too. Any questions before I move on to transportation and storage? Try and go through this. This is pretty quick. I don't have as much here. This is a list of all of our transportation contracts. The two I have highlighted here. First one is 2361. That was updated in the fall to extend that. That serves our Indianola station. So it's 30,000 decatherms of capacity with Mountain West. We did do that through 5 years. That's why I have the green check mark. I know kids these days like emojis, so I figured I'd throw an emoji on here. Keep with the times.
Kids and Chris.
And me.
And Chris, all right.
I want to see more of them in regulatory fire.
All right, more emojis. Check. I've got it.
Careful what you wish for.
Chris is getting emojis.
If it's clever enough, you'll get it in there.
One thing I'd point out is we've kind of done a good job with 5 and 10 years of moving things out. I'm not looking forward to 2027, just for the record. We have a lot of contracts expiring around that time, which is going to make it tricky, but I also like the idea that it's going to give us a lot of flexibility at that time to really get things aligned and make sure that we're good with where we are and everything. So I think the 2025, 2026 timeframe, if I'm still doing this, we're going to have a lot of discussions around all of this with these contracts and stuff. The next one, no notice. This was in last year's IRP. I wanted to highlight it and put a little emoji anyway, just because it did start in July, which was after the IRP year. But we did lock that in for 5 years as well. That's something we use all the time. These blue highlights, that's our firm peaking contracts, and we don't really have to talk about them yet. They go through 2024, so we have another year on them. The reason I have them highlighted in blue is something that we've learned is, we originally set these to go from like the middle of the month to the middle of the month, and our gas control has come to us and requested, can we really do those through November and all the way through February, kind of to catch the beginning and the end. We've had a lot of cold days in October, and by the time we get to November, there's a lot of fluctuations. They'd like those contracts in place earlier in the month. So they'll probably, next time we do it, go February all the way, or November all the way through February. Storage contracts, I've added in the Spire storage one down here. I've put that in so it does go through April, 5 years through 2029. We also, we extended our Clay Basin 988. We did that last year in May, but I wanted to put that in there as well, just because it kind of just started. But those are key contracts. The cost of those right now, if we were to get rid of them, they would be snapped up in a second. So we have right of first refusal on those. We definitely want to keep those. And there's those aquifers that I think we are going to extend here shortly. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was how our broader plan, right? We've talked about diversifying our supply locations. I forget, was it Commissioner that asked about, are those pipelines there right now? So I kind of took out my clip art here and drew some pipelines in. So sorry for the rough pipelines drawn in here, but this is kind of over, and this is a bit of a dated map, but it's the EIA has the map of kind of all the pipelines. I didn't find one that I really liked in terms of which pipelines it showed, but right here is Utah, so our service territory sits right in here. You've got Mountain West Pipeline is kind of this H-looking thing in light blue. Kern River is the red one that comes down. This is Opal Hub right here, that black dot. Kern River comes down, goes to California. You've got, here is the Clay Bay. Oop, I think I've got these reversed. I mixed up my colors somewhere. Sorry, but this one is Clay Basin right here, and this one is Spire. I don't know how my colors got messed up, but this one is Spire storage. So I put those on there. One we'll talk about here in a minute. This is another one owned by Spire. They just bought it in April. It is Salt Plains storage. It's actually in Oklahoma. So now we're starting to extend the conversation, right, outside of the Rockies. So now we've got other pipelines. You got Northwest Pipeline, which does come through us, goes all the way from the San Juan Basin up to Washington and Oregon. You've got Ruby Pipeline now. Ruby, in my mind, is coming back into play. First of all, because when we first looked at Ruby, we built a tap or not a tap really there. When they built the pipeline, they put in a valve, I guess, so that we could build a station there. I think we have some property. But we didn't build it. But at the time, their capacity costs like $1.10 a decatherm, right? Where you looked at Kern River, and it was 18, 20 cents, depending on when you looked at it, and Mountain West, 17 cents. So it was out of the market. Well, Ruby has since declared bankruptcy and now has a new owner. We might be able to get some reduced rate contracts on there, so we are looking at it. So Ruby Pipeline goes out here to Malin. Malin can connect up to Kingsgate, which is Canada, so gas coming in from Canada. We've also got in here is a green pipeline. This is Rockies Express. Rockies Express goes all the way across the country. Now, I'm not saying all of these have available capacity right now, and a lot of it's tricky because you have to connect one pipeline to another. We're just right now exploring possibilities of where we can use these other pipelines to get to other locations. This brown one here, or what color is this? Purplish, I guess, is CIG. This brown one here is Southern Star. So Southern Star, I reached out to them. They connect to this Spire storage in the Salt Plains storage, which is actually the cost right now I think is less than storage in the Rockies. So it's located somewhere else. People might not be pulling on it as much at the same time as we are. But Southern Star connects to Mountain West Pipeline. So I'm really trying to draw these pipelines together and see, okay, how can we piece these together? The real problem to solve is going from Opal Hub to Cheyenne Hub. So if you would have looked at, and I'm going to look at these pricing, that's where our pricing gap was this year. Opal Hub going to California. Cheyenne Hub has all these pipelines in between that couldn't get directly to California. So your pricing gap was in here. In fact, let's look at the pricing gap. So these are daily pricing for the winter. The top is your actual pricing. Bottom here is your differential. So that uses Kern Opal Hub as a baseline. So Kern Opal is flat. Everything else is the difference between the two. Right? So this just goes from November through April. You can see our price, I kept Cheyenne Hub in there as kind of a baseline. You can see it did spike up for a little bit, but not all through December like we did. Right? Those two, there was a lot of separation. There was $40 separation in those through parts of December. So that's why we're trying to see how we can get to Cheyenne Hub. You look at Kingsgate, which is Canada, that also had quite a bit of separation, not so much in December. They got hit by some of that December cold as well, so not as much there. You can see SoCal Citygate is usually a little bit more. We're going to try and get away from SoCal, paying SoCal pricing. And Malin is pretty even with Kern. So really what we want to get to is that yellow line. We want to get to supply that's at Cheyenne Hub pricing. This is the same graph, only monthly pricing indexes. So here's where we saw our big spikes at SoCal Citygate and Kern Opal. If you look at like One Oak, Southern Star, any of those, they didn't see that spike. So that's some areas that we're going to look to. Cheyenne Hub, you can't really see it, but that stays down here as well. They didn't see that monthly spike that we saw.
Where's SoCal Citygate physically?
Southern California.
I mean, but where?
It's I wasn't able to pin down exactly where, but it's all the pricing that goes to basically Southern California, LA area, I guess.
In El Paso.
So El Paso ties into
The
there.
strategy at all.
So it's down here, but El Paso, we could look at El Paso into Northwest to get some Permian gas. That could be something we can look at as well.
Yeah, I wondered because I saw that north-south line there, and it seemed like.
So Northwest Pipeline, there's not a lot of capacity on it. That's why I don't know that there's anything available on that, and it's a little trickier. Whereas here, we might be able to build in with some overthrust capacity or get onto Mountain West. That was kind of what I was focusing on, or if there's a way to, I don't know, maybe if we can get somebody to build a pipe between here. I don't know, but we're just looking at options right now, and the Permian would be great. Permian gas has been cheaper, but there's not a lot of takeaway between Northwest Pipeline. I mainly put this one on there in case there were questions about Line 2000. Line 2000 actually, the part that was out, sits down here.
Yeah. Is that Oklahoma storage, if you can connect it, is it useful to refill storage as you use it here? Or does that never make sense and it's just for moving the gas as you need it?
No, it could be. Again, all of this is just, this is my long-term outlook, right? This is nothing for next year. I just know we've talked a lot about tell us what's coming down the road long before it gets here. This is that. I'm starting now to really talk to these other pipelines about trying to get and spread out our footprint.
So it's been a couple years since I've thought about Magnum. Is Magnum planning to connect onto Kern, and is there capacity for that?
That is a good question. So I'm struggling with Magnum a little bit, I will be honest, because we've gotten to the point with Magnum where they want us to sign a memo that says we're going to sign up for something. And they're really being standoffish with really talking to me at this point about stuff because we don't have that memo. And I'm like, I can't give you a memo that says I'm going to sign up for something until I know the bigger picture and all that. So we're trying to work with them. We definitely, I talk to them, but we're kind of at a little bit of a standstill at this point, which to me is not the best marketing strategy.
Is there still a pipeline gap to them?
Kern River, but there are some pipeline issues with the lateral that gets to them.
Yeah.
and how that interplays with IPP, because they're building a lateral out there, but it's not necessarily there for others to use if they're building it. So here's the pipelines we're mainly talking to you. Rockies Express and Ruby are both owned by Tallgrass now. Southern Star, I've reached out to them, and Mountain West Pipeline and Northwest Pipeline, which are both Williams companies now. And then getting access to additional storage, we've looked at Spire Storage West, which we did. We're also looking at Salt Plains, and we could look at Magnum. And I'm sorry I didn't leave these guys much time. Are you tired of hearing from me yet? Or anybody got any more questions?
I'm just wondering, given the interaction and interplay between the gas plants for electricity, right, to service that, and the, I guess, the lack of regulation on pipelines that kind of mirrors the power regulation, I'm wondering if when you're looking ahead at the pipelines and the storage and the supply, I guess, are you also thinking that maybe there will be additional regulation on pipelines that you also have to be concerned about, given, again, the interplay with the power industry?
Absolutely. In fact, yes. So there's right now, NASB is kind of holding a big, I don't know what do you want, Jen, how would you characterize what it's a committee that's kind of getting together. We're working with FERC, and they're talking about all these issues. They call it gas electric harmonization. So we're a part of that discussion. We've been participating in that, but it's an industry topic at this point that we're trying to figure out ways to address how we balance our needs, power plants' needs, our needs during these high events, their needs, firm transportation, how reliable is it during some of these events, and how do we make it more reliable? How do we do we need to change cycle times and stuff like that? All of that's on the table at this point for exactly that reason. So do I have any concrete thing that I could say this is what's changing and happening? I don't yet, but all of those conversations are ongoing, and we're in the middle of them. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to turn it over and have a seat. Thanks for putting up with me.
All right, I gave my brief introduction at the beginning, but I'll do it again. I'm Dan McDonald. I'm an operations manager with responsibility for the Magna LNG facility. So I know several of you in this room have already heard about or are familiar with Magna LNG. This is a good shot of the facility, fully constructed, sunrise in October. Weather was obviously much better then. Little did we know what we were headed into. So again, just to educate those that aren't maybe familiar with the facility, production-wise, we have 100,000 gallons per day of production capability. We can store up to 15 million gallons, which is 1.2 BCF. Revaporization, we can revaporize 150 million a day. So that's about 8 days. If we were going full tilt, we'd have about 8 days that we could draw from the tank. And that's about 10% of the Wasatch Front design load. 7.2 megawatt power service, and it is a 24/7 manned facility. Just looking quickly at the process, so we withdraw and put back onto the same pipeline. So the pipeline is at 300 pounds. We take it off, compress it through our feed gas compression up to 640 pounds, send it through our pretreatment system, which is where we scrub the water, CO2, H2S, and mercury. We move it onto our liquefier, which is where we drop the natural gas temperature to negative 265. Put it into storage. Storage, it's constantly boiling off. You know, the surface temperature causes the LNG to boil off. We have boil-off compressors that take that boil-off gas and put it onto our low-pressure distribution system, our IHP system. Then we can send the bulk liquid quantities through our revaporization system, which is water propylene glycol heat exchangers. We heat it up. We can send it back out. We can send it back out at 720 pounds, but we obviously cut it before putting it back onto the pipeline. So looking back at 2022, it was a big year for us. That's when we officially commission the facility. So we completed staffing early part of the year. We do have one supervisor out there as well as 10 full-time technicians that are on shift. We successfully tested and commissioned all plant systems, with provisional acceptance being awarded to our general contractor on December 16th. We did put 200 million cubic feet, or roughly 2.4 million gallons, into storage. We needed to attain a certain level in the tank to test the pumps. So we did hit that level so that we could test those pumps. That was right around that December 16th timeframe. And then we decided to discontinue filling it at that point due to the high gas prices, which we've been talking about all morning. We did complete successful testing of the revaporization system, and that combined with the BOG, the boil-off gas, that all added up to about 700,000 cubic feet of gas that we did send back out either onto the high pressure or low pressure distribution systems. So looking back at the costs from the period of November through March, we used about 130,000 decatherms. You can see here 2.4 million roughly.
You say you used it. This is what you used to fill it, not what you took out.
Right.
That's the balance as of the end of March, 130,000 decatherms in the tank.
Okay.
So it's net.
Yeah, that would be net.
Power consumption, 1.1 million, and then other consumables, we put nitrogen, DI water amine into the processing part of the LNG, roughly 100,000. So this year, our focus is on filling that tank. We decided to start liquefying early part of April. We are continuing through that. This is still a new facility, so there are bumps in the road. We would like a linear curve. As you can see here, we have some plateaus. That's just anticipated maintenance and equipment shutdowns. But we do continue to we plan to continue filling all the way through the summer up until probably mid-October. And then we're going to conduct some vaporization tests again to make sure we're good for the heating season, and then go into standby mode by November. So.
Is the filling rate on the chart, is that kind of what you expect to do every year? Is that maximum filling rate? Or is that
Yeah, so that would be about what we would expect, except for I would expect less of, well, I got a point here. See these little plateaus you see? Those are just, I mean, again, it's hard to determine when those are going to be, but those are shutdowns. And who knows what we're going to have to do on the shutdown. We're just anticipating that that's going to be a little bit more bumpy this year. I would think that in the future, you're actually going to see a little bit better rates in the shoulder months. So like April through May, and then probably later part of September through October, because as the ambient temperature is cooler, your production rate actually goes up a bit.
And I might just add that we're, in this scenario, in this year, we're filling from, say, a near empty tank.
Right.
In future years, I think we anticipate we might be 50% full,
Sure.
depending on what we pulled out.
Yeah.
over the winter.
Yeah.
So the liquefaction season will be much shorter.
Right.
typically.
Good point. Yep. Yep. God, after-
So,
go
when
ahead.
you said the natural gas cost was 2.4 million, was that Wexpro gas? Was it spot price? Was it, what kind of gas was it? I'm curious.
It's a mix. I think they just used, so that's accounting's numbers. I think they just used the Baycock price and put it in.
That's a fairly high decatherm price.
Yeah, well,
That's why we stopped filling it.
That's why it didn't get filled.
Prices are high.
Yeah, we essentially put gas in to complete the commissioning process, test the pumps and the vaporization, and then due to gas pricing, it didn't make any sense to continue filling at that point in time.
Me, I feel so short-winded after Will.
That's okay.
We'll warm all down. Any more questions?
Have you found any problems or any hiccups with the plant at all?
We have. I would consider it normal commissioning hiccups, you know, I mean, you're just gonna have to go through that, that's what I said. This year will probably be a little bumpy for us. First full year of liquefaction, so, yeah. But I think we've gotten through the majority of it. Last year, October through December was rough.
So the October through December, was the contractor still sort of on the hook for a lot of it, or?
Yes, they had to obtain, they really have to obtain final acceptance, but they really had to obtain provisional acceptance. So they were there with us, right alongside us, trying to get it commissioned.
Just out of kind of my own maybe learning / curiosity, even if you're not, actively putting stuff in because of the prices, is there any part of the process that has to continue running in order to keep things active or not break or anything like that, besides regular maintenance?
Not necessarily. If you're talking like a short outage, let's say we got to go down for 3 to 4 days, it might make sense to continue to loop cold gas or nitrogen through the liquefier to keep it cold, because you do have a process where you have to cool it down. It requires a lot of energy. So if you keep it cool, you might be able to avoid some of that. Also, our pre-treatment system, if you circulate the amine, keep it at a high temp, that's good. But if you're going to go down for, any more than a week, no, you can shut it all down.
When you say go down, you mean go down on the actual liquefaction process?
Go down. Yeah, like shut down. You're not bringing gas in.
Yeah, you're still cooling what's there, and
The tank's gonna stay cold, right?
The tank's going to stay cold, yeah.
Yeah, there are processes like the boil-off gas compressor, which will operate continuously.
Yeah.
All right, well, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude the technical conference. So thank you everyone for coming.
So next conference is next Tuesday at 1:30, and I think we'll be talking about the responses to your RFP packages, right?